And as you can see, we have four speakers. Actually, we have three panel speakers and one moderator for our next session. It's a panel discussion for securing IoT. And we will invite Kirsten join again. And we also have Dmitry, CTO from Cybeats, join. And Patrick is a CEO from Ampere Industrial Security. And for the panel moderator, we have Ishika. Ishika is a recent Master of Engineering graduate from the University of Guelph. And during her master program, Ishika also worked on several projects and published research paper related to IoT security, 5G security, and artificial intelligence. And I will ask Ishika to lead the panel discussion and also ask our panel members basically to do their own self-introduction so you can learn more about their background. So, so I just ask our panel members. So we see Kirsten and Patrick there. Dmitry, can you? Yeah, so we see you. Okay. So I pass the control to Ishka, so you take control from there then.
For sure. All right. Thanks, Brian. So welcome everybody, and we are really excited to have this amazing panel for securing IoT discussion. But I'll speak for myself. I am super excited for this discussion with this amazing panel and learning more about IoT, security, OT is something that I love. So before we dive in, I would like everybody just to give everybody just a quick introduction about yourselves, and I would like to start with Patrick's on that one, if that's fine.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick Miller. I am CEO of Ampere Industrial Security, or a boutique consulting firm. We solve hard problems for different OT environments and ICS environments. My background, I was originally a telecom guy, early 80s, and then went into the power business in the 90s, and I've been in electric power as a kind of a primary sector since then. I have lots of experience in other sectors: mining, manufacturing, water, wastewater, chemical, shipping and rail, and others. I was one of the original architects of the NERC CIP standards, which is a federal regulation in North America, and was the actual first NERC CIP auditor in the world and stood that program up for the Western region, was my region that I was in. Since then, I've been the principal investigator at Department of Energy and CEO of several consulting firms. So, next.
Christine, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, Patrick, your background is just incredible, and it makes me smile every time I hear it. Kirsten Turnbull. I'm sorry. I set up this account before I got married, so it's got my maiden name. You can go by Hook or Turnbull. Network security is my specialty. It has been for the last 20 years. I had the fortunate opportunity of living in Calgary, so I was surrounded by oil and gas, and I got to cut my chops in some really, really cool environments. That's where I gained the majority of my knowledge about OT. Really was just understanding protocols at first, segmenting networks, and getting deeper into the technology that now looks at these networks passively.
Awesome. Dmitry, you want to go next?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. Dmitry Raidman. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders of Cybeats. Cybeats is a company that provides supply chain intelligence and management for SBOMs. And this is something that I'm doing on my day-to-day basis. I'm coming with a very extensive background in cybersecurity, over 20 years doing that, going back to Israel. And I'm also participating in various groups that promoting the usage of SBOMs and defining the standards of SBOMs.
Awesome. So, and I'm Ishika, and I'm thrilled to be a moderator for this exciting event. So, as we all know, IT is becoming an integral part of our lives and revolutionizing the way we live and work. But with the growing number of connected devices, I believe the risk of security breaches is also increasing. That's why this discussion is very important. And today we have some of the most brilliant minds from the industry with us today, who will provide you with their valuable insights and practical solutions to secure IoT. And to all the people who joined us online, a very warm welcome, and we would love you to be a part of this discussion too. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat if you like. And so without any further ado, fasten your seatbelts and get ready for this electrifying discussion We will learn a lot, have some fun, and most importantly, make IoT a safer place. Let's get started. So, talking about beginning with threats and vulnerabilities, what do you think are the biggest security threats and vulnerabilities facing the Internet of Things today, and how can these sensitivity be addressed? I'd like to start with Patrick on that, if you want to go ahead. Sorry, I believe you're muted right now.
How about now?
Perfect.
Fantastic. Threats and vulnerabilities, IoT. I think the biggest vulnerability is that we're racing out a whole bunch of IoT that was not really well designed from a security standpoint. I mean, it may have some fantastic features, but security was an afterthought or a not thought at all. And I realize we can't stop innovation. I'm not saying like slow down and put the brakes on. We just have to kind of start merging security into it. We've kind of gone a long way without it. It's probably time to start putting some security into it. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities in these devices. A lot of them don't get updated. So the biggest threat to those vulnerabilities, honestly, it's typically going to be things like bot armies is what we end up seeing in most cases with IoT devices, specifically as they get turned into some sort of zombie and then they're part of a DDoS attack and that kind of thing. Or they become a gateway, like you mentioned, with the casino and the fish tank. And there's other examples. And there were some good examples in the chat as well, like the Target attack. So those, becoming a landing point or becoming kind of, roped into some bigger DDoS army are typically the biggest ones I see. Anyone else have anything to add?
Absolutely.
I was going to say, Patrick, I 100% agree with the bot comment. That's where my mind has been going. I think for the last several years, I picture maybe something like a Nest thermometer. Your house has now just become part of a massive attack against, I don't know, it could be a bank or something. So literally the thermometer in your house is part of the reason that the bank is being taken out. And yeah, I think you're 100% correct. We're rushing these out. There's no security or very little security and very little visibility into where these devices are and what they're doing. So yeah, I'd have to say I agree 100% with Patrick. One thing I would add too, and this is something totally, not a security threat, but in my travels, what I'm starting to notice is that we're starting to lose technology individuals that really understand networking. There's a whole bunch of cloud experts out there. Awesome. But we're not all going to the cloud, right? So we have to have the skill set, the hard, the core networking concepts, the core networking skills to be able to still protect these IoT/OT devices.
And
it's not necessarily a security threat, but it's definitely a threat that I see.
But that's a good point. I mean, even in the chat, someone was mentioning, why is that fish tank device even on the same network, right? So this is some fundamental network segmentation stuff that you should just be doing anyway.
Absolutely. We'd love to get your views on that, Dmitry, if you have.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said before, of course. One of the issues that I've seen in the IoT space is that many users, I think on average, they have 22 devices today in every single home, right? Like that's kind of the latest statistics. And people just forget about these devices, right? They connect them, they know that they do whatever they do, like they control our furnaces, our air conditioners, but we tend to forget to upgrade them, right? Upgrade their firmware, so they just stale and they become outdated. Some of the people are keeping the default passwords, right? One of my asks is, hey, please always when you get new Shiny IoT device, just go and set up there something else than the default password. Doesn't matter how weak it is, it's better than just keeping it there. It's easy to identify it and easy to use that to access the device remotely and do whatever can be done with it. Botnets, definitely, it's a big issue. And another thing is that Patrick mentioned is really legacy, right? Legacy devices. Some devices, they are 1 decade old and they're running an operating system that are not maintained anymore. They're end of life, end of support. And the problem is that we don't even know that, right? We see that thing, it's running, it's doing something, but for us, like in the cyberkinetic world, let's say this way, but we don't know what's running inside it, right? So that's one of the great threats and issues with these devices.
Absolutely. Love your thoughts on this one. Just to follow up on that, and it's probably one of my favorite questions here about technologies and trends. So what emerging IoT security technologies or trends are you most excited about, and how do you see the landscapes of IoT security evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? Well, would love to get your thoughts on that. Christine, if you want to start on this one.
Sorry, did you ask me?
Yeah.
I had a great answer for this. Maybe I'll let Patrick or Dmitry go first, so
For
that I
sure.
can formulate it a bit better.
I can take it.
For
Of course.
sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The trends that I see is first of all, many of these devices are based on Linux kernel, right? And I see a lot of work being done in Linux kernel to enable capabilities that will contribute to security tools, or even including security measures against different type of attacks. And that's really great, right? Another trend that I'm seeing is also that was called, I think, in a report by Linux Foundation about a year ago, where they actually calling embedded developers to start moving even the development of Linux kernel to more advanced languages that does not require or rely on the developer to manage the memory space on his own, right? Something that's more advanced like Rust, right, or like Go. And they're really encouraging companies and people and individuals to do that transition, which really, if we're looking at most of these devices, a lot of the vulnerabilities that are related to buffer overflow attacks and different type of problems with the memory management, which are really eventually a user error, right? And that's something that I envision in the next 3 to 5 years, that developers of these devices will start using more advanced technologies, more advanced languages that will eliminate the kind of the basic mistakes and errors that we're seeing today, and helping to take over these devices.
Absolutely. That's an interesting one. Patrick, if you want to take over and give us your thoughts on that.
So I've got a bunch of notes on this one. I'm really excited about a lot of things, actually, because this is going to be, we are standing on the doorstep of a brave new world with this kind of technology. The compute power is going up and the size is going down. So these are going to be tiny little devices that will do all kinds of things. And then they will interact with each other, and they will interact with the cloud in ways that will transform things that we do. So I'm very excited to see where we go with all of this. My concerns, of course, are that it's not going to come out secure by default. So to Dmitry's point earlier, there are devices that have default passwords. There is legislation, at least in some countries already, that in order to sell IoT in their country, you have to have some secure by default functions. For example, the device won't enable until you change the default password, right? It's just some things that are already kind of built in like that. In the event that it goes end of life, then there is some sort of indicator to you that this device is end of life, and you either need to, change it, or other cases if the vendor goes out of business, and that's happened as well, or the vendor's been bought and then the previous company gets mothballed. So standard kind of business economics fit into this as well. But I do see those elements coming in and it being exciting. I'm also interested in some of the multi-use approaches of the different technologies, so that they're not just consumer-based technologies, but they'll be industrial use as well. So you'll get this kind of multi-use or multi-purpose capability. But one of the most interesting things, and to Dmitry's point about the kind of memory-safe languages like Rust and similar, I'm also seeing the use of things like large language models to go through and scan the code, or even write the code for them for certain modules that need to be done in a more secure way. So, if we can't get the developers trained to do this in a way that's more useful, then we can do this at scale with other technologies or other means. So I do see a whole wide range of options to make the situation better, going from market forces, legislation, and just good practice all coming together at the same time.
Absolutely.
Patrick, I appreciate that answer, because I think my answer that I had carried was a bit negative. And so listening to you guys, I appreciate that, because your excitement is kind of palatable. I was going to say the trend that I was seeing is really like we're just the amount of IoT devices is doubling, tripling, quadrupling, and we're not doing anything about security. But that's not true because we're having these conversations. So if I could say anything, the trend that I am seeing is that I'm having way more of these conversations about how do I secure it. At least we're getting, people that are curious, how do I segment my home LAN? Like I loved showing my dad how to segment the IoT devices in his home network. It made me feel proud. The fact that I'm having that conversation with my dad is a trend in the right direction.
And to add to that, we're seeing some of the home router manufacturers by default have an IoT network built into it. It just comes as a feature. Just you turn it on and it's got 2 networks ready to go. In fact, 3. There's a guest network, a devices network, and a personal network. So we're seeing some trends that are better. We're learning from some of the mistakes. Is it perfect? No, not by any stretch. There's a ton of work to do, but we can still kind of go down this road with a little bit of hope in mind.
Absolutely. So following up with those great ideas about organization and customers. So how can organization and customers ensure that IT devices and networks that we talked about are secure from cyber attacks and data breaches? And also, how can we create awareness for that among the consumers about the importance of securing their devices as we talked about? So would like to, anybody just volunteering on that? Dmitry?
Kirsten, take the lead.
Well, I feel like you kind of addressed a bit of it, Patrick, in the past question, but in the sense that kind of going forward, the consumers, like my dad's asking me, how can I secure this? That's something that's I consider quite positive. We need more people skilled, I think, in securing these type of devices. We need more awareness about the fact that these devices need to be secure, because I tend to see a lot of kind of assumptions that the product or the device is secure by default, and that's not the case, right? We need to have, I think, bigger voices when it comes to really talking about the risks. We need to be having more of these conversations, really.
Yeah,
Absolutely, I completely agree on that one. So, Dmitry, would like to get your views on that about organizations and consumers just getting more aware on that one.
Yeah, well, I think that there's many things that organizations can do better, right? So I think one of them we already mentioned, and we have listened to it in the previous presentation, right? It's assessment. It's knowing what is on our networks, right? So we want to assess, we want to understand the inventory. We want to be able to monitor this inventory, right? We want to apply some zero trust principles to this inventory and the devices on the network. Patrick mentioned it a couple of times. Proper network segmentation. That's the kind of ABC of IoT security, right? If you have your fridge and you have your dryer and washer on your network, create for them a different SSID and connect it there. Make sure that it has the different password than the rest of your network. It's segmented. It has like different gateway, etc. Right? Keeping devices up to date, of course, important. And of course, there is a new era of devices that I can tell you that I was dealing with it very long time before I started doing what I'm doing right now, which is really related to devices protection, right? Actually on device in-depth protection. So it's the ability of giving the defensive mechanisms like endpoint detection and the protection system on device itself. There is such companies, there is such technologies. Yes, it's very hard to, and maybe they still early to the market, but it's definitely the future that can help, right, in mitigating these risks. And then it's the in-depth visibility of the devices, right? We want to know what the software that sits on the devices, right? So if you are an organization and you're bringing devices, especially if it's industrial controls or OT environments, ask for software bill of materials, right? You want to know what's inside these devices. You want to be able to get this information. You want to monitor this information. You want to know when there is a new vulnerability, it might affect the firmware of your device. You want to be knowledgeable about it at the same time as your manufacturer of the device, right? So you can mitigate it quickly. You want to close that information flow and feedback loop. And one thing that I also want to mention is that it's not just enough to reset the passwords of the devices from the default settings, right? If you pay attention, many devices, like recently I had to install like a electric vehicle charger in my house, right? And think about that. The charger created a Wi-Fi network with a default password to connect to it. Like, so I had my Wi-Fi network, and suddenly I have another Wi-Fi network in my house that connected now to my primary Wi-Fi network, and it allows anyone to go near my garage and connect to that Wi-Fi network and get access, right, to hop to the next network segment. So also we need to pay attention to such things, right, like rogue devices and rogue networks that have been created in the organizations or in the homes. So that's my take on that.
Dmitry, I love that you added the visibility, because that was the one thing I was really thinking that we're not really kind of focusing on is, you know, a common scenario that plays through my mind is it's a SolarWinds-like attack where, you know, an attacker compromises the supply chain. So they compromise, let's use Nest thermometers, because the truth is there's so many of them out there. So your Nest thermometer gets a new security update, but the Nest thermometer doesn't know that the attacker basically embedded malware into the update. And so now everyone who gets the update, now we're talking millions of people that will get that update. Who knows what it does? Can they have access to turn the power in your house all the way down to zero or all the way up? Who knows? But we don't have good visibility when it comes to what these devices are doing. So if your Nest device always goes to a certain website for updates, but then one day it goes to an absolutely different website for updates, that's a cause for concern, but how are you going to detect that? So.
Absolutely. Those are some amazing thoughts. And I completely, as being like a student itself, I keep hearing the word visibility around so much that everybody comes with awareness and everybody should be visible on those things as well. And following up, talking about regulations. So how do you see IoT security regulations evolving in the near future, and what impact will that have on businesses and consumers? We'll love to know.
Take that one. Speaking as I'd like to say recovering regulator. I think it will have a major impact. I think it will likely be one of the biggest impacts. What ends up happening with regulation, it's rarely a forethought, right? It's not something that we set out down a certain path. It's always an afterthought, and it's usually after some, I like to nicely call it a catalytic event, some game-changing situation like there's a colonial pipeline style attack, right? Now there's a bunch of regulation that will fit that situation going forward. NERC-CIP was one that happened back in the early days from right after the basically 2003 blackout. And as you know, there was a SQL worm issue that went around that exacerbated the issue. So usually regulation follows kind of some, you know, large scale or widespread, widely known problem. And the more we have problems with IoT, and the state of security with IoT, there will likely be some knee-jerk reaction about regulation. We're already seeing this in a lot of countries, like some of the IoT laws, things like delivering secure by default products, for example. I do think at the same time, we're going to see some normalization from what I call the para-regulatory, kind of adjacent to regulation, but not necessarily regulation, which is typically things like standards. So you'll see things like underwriters' laboratories or similar will rate these products in certain ways. Security will become a rating factor in the product itself as well. So I do think that that's going to become common. I also think in the similar vein, you'll begin to see things like product liability cases where legal precedent will start driving the needle in addition to regulation. So recall laws and similar things where if you deliver some products that end up, you know, causing some sort of life or health safety issue or a widespread, like if a Nest thermometer, for example, and you end up causing temperature issues in a freezing zone or an overly hot zone and people die, usually lawsuits are pretty good motivators to cause these things to happen as well. So I think that just on all those fronts, those are all active moving parts, and they will absolutely, definitely influence these products going forward. Does it mean that the products are going to change overnight? No, because these things move slowly. But it does mean that they understand that this is definitely in their future. In fact, if they ignore this fact, they will have a rude awakening at some point. But the biggest challenge is these devices now are so ubiquitous. They're everywhere because they're very inexpensive, because they didn't put in security controls. They didn't spend all the extra time in the right development languages and these kinds of things. This means that as we go forward, whether it's any one of these forces that cause these devices to get more secure, it will cost more for those devices. So you'll also see costs go up at the same time as a result. Those two things always go hand in hand. It's just standard economics. But yeah, I definitely see any of these, whether it's legislation, regulation, legal precedent, and kind of, we'll say kind of negative market forces versus positive market forces will definitely have impacts.
Absolutely. Those are some great thoughts. And Christine, if you want to add up something about regulation for businesses and consumers.
Yeah, having worked in regulated versus non, I really can see the benefit of having the regulations, and it breaks my heart. I think anywhere I've worked where it's not regulated, Colonial Pipelines, as bad as it was so inspiring to see how quickly they were able to implement regulations. So it gives me hope, and I'm right where Patrick is. I think, as he said, there's going to be, there will be at some point penalties, I think, when it comes to the vendor and the security of the device. I'm saddened at the fact that I know full well that it's going to take a compelling event to get this kicked off. But at the same time, we're ready for it. We're here and we're ready.
Awesome. Dmitry, do you want to add some points on that?
Dmitry, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
So, yeah, regulations are really great, I would say, tool to make device makers to do the right things. However, the main question here is, okay, there will be regulations, right? Let's say that tomorrow they will not allow to use any cameras from certain camera manufacturer. And these cameras are installed in many locations, banks, offices, warehouses, military bases, with cables that will run. In many cases, these specific cables are, can only be used with these specific cameras. How they will going to be retrofitted? That's kind of the big question, and that's very, very interesting, right? Regulations is one thing, and complying with the regulations is a very different thing. But definitely, regulations are coming in this space, especially I hope in the IoT. The only question is what we're gonna do with all of the 25 or billion of IoT devices that we already have out there.
Yeah, I look back and I look at other situations where we've had massive like global transformations, and the Industrial Revolution immediately comes to mind. And there were factories that did absolutely awful, awful things for quite some time before regulation came in and forced them to change their practices. And it was expensive, and it was a difficult change. But will we see this in the next 5 years? Maybe. Will we see it in the next 10, 25 years? Yes, definitely. And it will change.
Yeah, agree.
Awesome. Great thoughts on that one. So talking about regulations, and we were talking about customers coming in about how should they handle up security. So talking about convenience here, how do you think we can balance the need for security that we are creating an awareness for with the desire for convenience and ease of use when it comes to IoT devices, because it's all around, and what trades off are involved in this one? So would want to start with Patrick's or Christine, anybody?
Sure, I'll jump in. I have lots of thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So everybody on this call, I'm going to make an ask of you. We need your help. I'm not going to solve this myself. I can't. We all need to work together to make this a better place. Our job is not to say no. Our job is to say yes if, yes but. That's okay. These companies are trying to make money. They're just trying to be in business, and it's their job to take as much risk as they can and still make money at the end of the day. So we have to find ways to design these products so that the consumer doesn't have to think about it. It's got to work like a toaster. You put the bread in, you push the button, and the toast comes out. We can't make everybody a security expert. We just can't. But we can use our collective knowledge as security experts to make their lives easier so they don't have to be security experts. So we've got to get better at the stuff that we design, making it easier for these products to be more secure. And I know that's a big ask. And you're thinking, how do we do that? If I had the answer, we'd be done already. But that's for us to figure out as a group. That's why we're in this business, is to make things better for everybody else. So asking everyone to become a security expert is a false hope. Just get over it. It's not going to happen. You're not going to make your grandmother a security expert, and you're not going to make everybody in the world out there a security expert. We have to make these things so easy that they can just use them and go on about their daily lives, and they can not worry about it being insecure.
Absolutely. Love those thoughts on that. Christine, any thoughts to add up?
Patrick worded it like perfectly. Convenience, right? Like I think back to like how impatient I was 10 years ago versus now in terms of wanting something, and there's a drastic difference. So I can only imagine 10 years from now, convenience is going to be, really at the forefront. So I love what Patrick said about it's not no, it's how. It's let me understand what you're trying to do. Let me show you a better way of doing this. And again, I think we need more professionals in this area having these conversations, working with individuals, customers, consumers. That's what we really need. We need education. And Patrick's absolutely right. They're not going to become security experts. But if there's a giant big red button that they just have to press that says this is secure now, then let's bake that in. Let's make it easier for these devices to be secure.
Absolutely. Would love to hear your thoughts on that, Dmitry.
Yeah, I can only add a little, right? Because everything was the most important thing were said. I just want to give some real life example, right? And the classic example is today when we're going and we're logging in to our Gmail account, as example, right? We have our username, we have our password, we have our multi-factor authentication, but then once we logged in, we can use the single sign-on everywhere, right? I'm really looking forward to the day where single sign-on will be also expanded to IoT devices, right? That's one of the technologies that I would love to see actually getting there. Some of the devices already have it, like Nest have that in their solutions, but we really need to look at penetration of that capabilities into other devices, right? I want to be able to sign in with my one username, one password. It has to give it some temporary token, which is very secure, and allow this device communicate over secure channel, which is encrypted with the cloud or other devices on my network. And I think that's something that I would love to see, and it wouldn't change the convenience, right? I mean, it will be very convenient to use. I have one user, one password, one way to log in, one way to authenticate myself with any system.
Absolutely. That is something that's an interesting thought too, because that is something that we use like every single day, and I think almost every time. So that if that happens, it would be super convenient. And just a last question that we have here is probably one of our open-ended questions and an interesting one to all of the young youth people who are participating right now in the discussion. So what are your best resources for the upcoming youth who want to dive in? Somebody who's wanting to get in deeper in the field of IoT or cybersecurity or OT. What are the best fields or resources out there that students or young youth should be aiming at?
I started the last one. Someone else go.
Dmitry, you should.
Sure, I can go. So one of the best resources I can tell you is really podcasts, right? Find the right podcast, subscribe to them, listen to this podcast while you're commuting to work, right? Or traveling, or just resting. That's one great resource. And other resources like internet is really oversaturated with trainings and courses. I mean, one of the one I really like, one of the resources I like is Cybery. So I really recommend anyone that likes IoT or cybersecurity to go to that resource and look what they can offer you. So I would leave it here.
I will also, obviously, Microsoft has free training available. There's IoT for beginner. There's Defender for IoT Ninja training. And again, I would just like Dmitry said, podcasts. I participate and capture the flags whenever I possibly can to kind of keep up on my skills. There's a lot of cool CTF events that are incorporating IoT devices in them. So if you can get yourself registered for those, it's a great way to learn by hacking stuff and really understanding how they work. And again, Cybery is the third I was going to say.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I would add there's an enormous wealth of knowledge on YouTube for this kind of stuff, and there's a lot of hands-on stuff on YouTube. Hackaday is a great website to learn about all things related to kind of OT, IT, IoT, and they really do a good job of breaking it down in a lot of ways. So Hackaday is really good for that kind of thing. Also makerspaces. So most cities have like volunteer time where you can just go to a makerspace and you can get, right there, start tearing apart some, OT, IoT thing or widget, and you get hands-on from somebody right there. You get a person to talk to and ask questions in a lot of cases. And almost all the makerspaces I've been to have been very open, very friendly, and an enormous wealth of hands-on, person-to-person direct knowledge where you're not sifting through 500,000 YouTube videos and 5 million Google links to try to find what you're looking for. Getting good at Google searches is not that difficult. You can Google dorking, and you can learn how to refine your searches to get better searches when you're trying to look for specific topics. One of my favorites in the ICS space is a guy named ICS Gabe. If you haven't followed ICS Gabe yet, go follow ICS Gabe. I love that man, and he's got such an easy, open. It's both technical and non-technical at the same time. So it's good for beginners. It's good for people that know, but it's a great resource. He's got a bunch of YouTube videos. On Twitter, I think he's ICS_Gabe. Find him there. But yeah, Gabe is fantastic. But there's actually a wealth of resources out there. Cybery is fantastic. Microsoft, any one of these IoT manufacturers often has webinars and podcasts. Dmitry mentioned podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time. Probably, I would say a good 2 hours of my day, almost every day, is on podcasts just to stay in touch with what's going on. There's just so many resources out there. It's hard to kind of ferret out what you want. But I would say don't make that be a reason to not do it, right? Just because it's too much to go through. If that stops you, well, shame on you. You should be more diligent to trying to find something that's going to fit your world. And that's okay if you find something and you don't like it. As we mentioned, there are so many resources out there. Just move on to the next one and see if you like it. The good thing I would ask is when you find something you like, share it with those around you so that they can get access and use out of it as well. Living this world in a vacuum, I'm going to make another call. We got to work together to make this better for all of us. So when you find something, share it and let others know about it. Whatever your network is, I don't care if it's a network of two, just share it with them to help get the word out for things that are doing well for you.
Absolutely. So I would just want to add a follow-up question. I read it in the chat that people might know more related to the awareness question that we talked about. Would you want to add up your thoughts about what are the most significant security risks associated with the IoT devices and how can they be mitigated? Because we mentioned in the presentation as well about visibility, talking about awareness, talking about what data breaches can happen. So majorly going around, what risk can they be aware of that they should take those steps on an immediate action than like just wait for a couple of times to get it on a worsened step. So just want to conclude on that note and get your thoughts. Dmitry, do you want to go in?
I'll let Patrick or Kirsten to answer this one.
Sure, Patrick, if you want to go ahead on this one.
Simple biggest risk is you probably have an undocumented or unknown backdoor into your organization that you don't know about and you're not managing well. So yeah, you might as well let the door open. So that's a huge risk. I mean, from there, all bets are off. They can do what they want in most cases, especially if they're of any degree of sophistication. And if they're not, then they'll just drop ransomware and exfil data and extort you. So, those are your potential worst case scenarios. Some other bad day scenarios, or as I mentioned, is be part of a bot army. And now your organization is, performing DDoSes for some nation state against some other nation state, or, trying to DOS some bank's EDI interface or something like that, which causes problems. So yeah, I mean, your biggest risk is the fact that you have things in your environment that you're not managing that are probably woefully insecure. And as a security professional, you kind of know what that leads to. Yeah.
To Shodan.
Yeah, Shodan.
As seen on Shodan. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Christine, do you want to add your thoughts on that?
I think the guy summed it up really well.
Yeah.
Again, here I am screaming about visibility, but reconnaissance again doesn't happen in a second. when you're looking and you have visibility and you're able to detect anomalous events in your environment, whether it be OT, IT, IoT networks, you know, it doesn't happen right away. So there's telltale signs. And again, this is just me kind of being stuck in my head from intrusion detection pretty much my whole career. Patrick summed it up really well.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree with that one.
Yeah.
So I believe that's a wrap up for all the questions and discussions that we had. And I would like to thank all of you for having this amazing discussion and just get Ryan back and take back over.